work with athletic populations,
Mhm.
which you have and do,
Mhm.
what do you, because everyone assumes things about athletes, that they might be the hardest workers in the world. That's one of the things that Sean talks about, is that he showed a picture of a Los Angeles Laker training session one time.
Yeah.
They're on the road and they're in a hotel, and he said, this is what the session really looked like. And he shows the picture, and it's of 5 Lakers sitting on foam rollers staring at their phones. And it's like,
125%.
and he's like, these guys they're already the best, some of the best athletes in the world. Your training program is not going to make them a better athlete, so you have to not mess them up. Get
Yeah.
them to recover and not mess them up. Don't overload them with things to think about that they don't necessarily need to know.
Right.
So what is your experience working with athletes? Yeah, and he also said a great thing, because I know we've talked about this also, is that he was talking to a strength coach on a different team one time, and the strength coach says, look at that guy. The owner just hired him. I don't even know what he does. And now I'm supposed to manage him. Like, I don't even know. So like,
Yeah.
I just realized that, sometimes sports is not as organized as we think. And we just have this assumption that, oh, if it's the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Giants, that ship is so tightly wound and like perfectly operating.
Yeah.
And the reality isn't always, that's not always the reality.
Yeah.
So what is it like?
Totally
Because
true.
you've worked with college athletes, obviously, high school athletes, and even professional athletes, because Patrick Mahomes.
Mhm. I did get to work with him last year. Took him through an evaluation. Yeah.
So
Um,
what are athletes like to work with? What are their bodies like? What are their attitude? What are their minds like? Just what are athletes like? Not what you see on TV, but in reality.
yeah. So just to kind of cover my basis of who I've worked with in as far as sports goes, I've worked with the NFL, the Major League, MLB, and the minor league guys. I've had some professional soccer players, women's soccer players. And then I've worked with some WNBA, women's basketball. So I've kind of hit all the different sports and how very different they all are.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing.
Their bodies or the demands of the sports produce different issues.
A little bit of both, but I would say even I'm going to try to be really broad, but if you think about what the sport demands,
Mm-hmm.
I've always said this in football, if you're closer to the ball, if so meaning you have a position that's closer to the ball, this is my own experience, you tend to, in my opinion, be a little bit more, you have to be thinking. The
Mm-hmm.
further you get out, to me, it's more of a all out sympathetic. You think of your wide receivers, they just got to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that they're not thinking as high level, but I think that their decision making is different
Okay.
than a center or a quarterback who has to think, oh gosh, I got to figure this out. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Wide receiver, you just take off.
Yeah.
And I always say that the wide receiver, further away from the ball, the bigger the personality that goes
Well,
up.
that does seem to be the case, because the divas tend to be the wide receivers, as they say, and you don't hear much from the offensive linemen. But having played high school football, it's
Yeah.
not easy to play the line. We ran an unorthodox offense, so I was kind of a tight end, but I would also split out as a wide receiver. And as a wide receiver, at least on that level, you're not making adjustments. Like, it's more complex now for receivers, because they have to read defenses and kind of adjust their routes depending on what they're seeing.
Right.
Offensive line is doing that on every play. Like, they have to see how the defensive line and linebackers are lining up, and then
Yeah.
figure out who they need to make adjustments for. And then there's rules about, block inside out. And if this guy comes, you take him, and then this guy's got to step. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
Offensive line is insanely hard.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
You have to and centers have to point it all out. So yeah, they're definitely cerebral.
Totally. And the offensive versus defensive, there's actually a difference in that too that I find. So it's really interesting. But you also got to think O-line, they have to protect somebody. So innately they got their job, and then they got to, a wide receiver's just there for the flash, and they get the cool touchdown, and then they get all the glory, and then they do a fun dance in the end zone, and then, life is good. But so I would say working with different athletes, the biggest hesitancy that I've heard in baseball, not so much with athletes I work with, but I do remember when I went to the Diamondback, PRI offers an integrative baseball course.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it about, wow, 6 years ago now that I think about it. So I took it a while back at the Arizona facility, talking in the Colorado Rockies, and I think the Diamondbacks share the facility. And a lot of the questions in that class were like, aren't we going to mess up our athletes training this asymmetry? And I still hear it. I hear it from all strength and conditioning. And I'm like, that's an interesting thought, because what they say is their asymmetry make them special.
Mhm.
And I want to be like, asymmetry makes all of us special. If we didn't have asymmetry, we would look like Lego men, which we probably have patients that do that. We
Mhm.
wouldn't rotate.
Right.
We wouldn't digest. We wouldn't actually be able to sit down and poop,
Yeah, and that's a good point, because a lot of people, and that was my initial. I remember when I first entered into the PRI world,
Uh-huh.
you automatically say, "Wait, why are we asymmetric?" Automatically, that just shows that we're already biased towards symmetry.
Perfection.
Yeah, it's just as valid to say why symmetry instead of asymmetry, but we all think first why asymmetry instead of symmetry. That just shows that humans are completely biased towards symmetry, thinking it's the norm. But as you said, go into the rotate, because you were very helpful to me, whether you realize it, like probably like 2 years ago, after we first met.
Yeah.
And the reason that Kasey and I met were because she told me that she admired my social media game, and, and that you weren't all in on the social media yet. So I remember that. I was like, oh yeah, thanks. But anyway,
Yeah.
but I remember you said that, I think we were talking about myokin, we were talking about rotation, and you stated that we are, we cheat at rotation when we're in a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it, because you know so many things and you forget them because there's so many things to try to remember. And
Yeah,
then,
little pearls.
yeah, and yeah, like, so you already know it, but it hasn't sunk in to a level that it becomes one of your priorities to explain it to other people. And I think
Right.
at least 2 years ago, and you said, they can't rotate these people too aggressively because they've been cheating on rotation for so long. And I was just like, damn it, I knew that. And it had lost its, it had lost its importance in my hierarchy of things I had to think about. Let's put it that way. I knew it, but it hadn't yet either gone all the way up, or you can't hold so many competing thoughts in your mind. But anyway,
Right.
after you said that, that became I was like, that's freaking right. I gotta start remembering that this is all about rotation, which I knew, but again,
Uh-huh.
there's just so many different ways you're trying to explain stuff, and you kind of forget some things.
Totally.
But that's a
Yeah.
huge concept. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I would say, like, let's put it into baseball, because I do work with quite a bit of pitchers in baseball, and I enjoy that. I like actually looking at their videos and watching them pitch, and I've gotten to the point where I can watch a video and be able to biomechanically assess it in about 10 seconds with a short slow-mo. Now I don't have that
Yeah,
quick
yeah.
eye. And see where they're not loading or what's going on, and looking at other things and kind of putting it into perspective about what's actually going on in their body and why maybe they aren't able to get that, even though their pitching coach is saying, hey, you're not loading well, or you're not, you hear all sorts of different things, because there's so many walks of life, and what's the golden standard and what's not. And oh, they said that you should hop going towards the mound, or you should, so you hear all those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we live in this is tying into your compensatory, so you're compensating into rotation, which is what we're talking about. We live in a major plane of motion called our sagittal plane, and you've talked about that before, right? So that's
Oh
not
yeah.
okay. We're all extension driven human beings. I mean, I can almost just say that across the board. But you look at our lifestyles, look at you and I right now are staring at a computer screen, and for maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then maybe you'll go to 2 more, and you're going to do this for most of your day. And then you're going to get in your car. Well, you might not in Jersey as much as we do here in Texas.
We do. We just don't have as far to drive.
Yeah. Then I got to drive an hour home. No, I'm just kidding. Texas isn't that big, but it is. And then you go on your walk, and the next thing you know, you've done the same motion, and you've sat in the same motion. You've processed information the same way. And maybe you went on a run, and then maybe you did some squats at the gym and a deadlift. Now you've never done any sort of variability, especially if you're not even swinging your arms when you walk. So you take that and how we are as humans. We're not designed to be sitting here for 12 hours a day. And then you go and say, hey, can you throw this ball 90 miles per hour, perhaps? How else are you going to rotate when you've been that human being locked up in a sagittal plane?
So just, and I know I have mentioned this, but sagittal extension locks up your spine so that you cannot rotate effectively.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so here's my favorite about that. This, I'll never forget, Mike Cantrell said, now, of course, everybody, I'm from the South. Mike is from the South, so I know a lot of people probably didn't get it. And not that I've seen a lot of alligators, but he's like, you know, when you're alligator hunting, and everybody's like, no, we have no idea what you're talking about. We're in Northeast. We're in Boston. I was training for myokinematic. And so you kind of get this whole glaze over look. But I really envisioned what he was talking about. You take the alligator and you lock it up so it can't rotate and bite you. You lock it out into extension. So here you are eliminating rotation in a, you know, an animal by going into extreme extension. That's what we're doing all day long. And you can't rotate. So we're like literally locking our own selves up, but then still trying to throw down the mound 90 miles per hour.
Right. Or just going to the gym. And
yeah, you don't have to be a baseball player.
Call-off presses, or whatever they call them, not knowing that our spine is an extension. It's like, I don't know where I'm supposed to feel this. I just feel it in my back. But theoretically, I should feel it in my abdominals. Why don't I?
Yes.
So that's what you become an alligator.
Totally. And it doesn't even have to be sports related, right? I mean, it could be, I bent down to pick something up at Walmart off the shelf and I rotated back up.
Which is how most people throw out their SI joints.
Yes.
I never did it while lifting. No, once. That was on a leg press. Every other time it was getting dressed, brushing my freaking teeth.
Yeah.
Remember, I was patterned out the wahoo. You know, I was how extreme I was. And cleaning up. That's how I would throw out my SI joint. And at that point, you're like, what the F is wrong with my life?
Yeah.
And you just explained it.
Yeah.
When you are extended over periods of time, you know, the time under tension, that system is tensed. You know, you never know what's going to be the proverbial camel. No. The
straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, that one. And it happens over and over again. But it's because of this alligator effect that you've lost the ability to rotate.
Right. Can't move.
Yeah. So, okay. So going back to the athlete, the baseball players, because that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So they're sagittally locked up.
Right.
Quite often. And they are now trying to get rotation to get that arm back and then also to come forward and follow through and rotate that way. So what happens?
Yeah. So, let me think how I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about an experience that he is a very top pitcher. I'm not going to give any names or anything, but his organization, when I first saw him, never once had he heard about breathing and his rib cage moving. Now, mind you, he had been through a pretty extreme injury. And so even at that time, it was kind of that whole thing, what you're talking about that you said Sean was talking about with the teams. Yeah. You're like, wait, you mean small town Fort Worth girl over here knows a little bit more potentially about something, not baseball, but about rib cage mechanics. But you got these people in these spotlights and they're not talking about that. Yeah. And you're getting paid millions of dollars and no one has talked to you about your rib cage moving, but you throw a ball 100 miles an hour. I'm like, it just doesn't.
It's not part of strength and it's not on the CSCS. I can tell you that.
Yes, true. Yeah. This is very true. But so yeah, what I'll find with baseball is just patterns like us all. Actually, and they covered it in the PRI course. But unlike you're in my job, they're literally paid on how well they rotate. Yeah. And so at some point, your body starts to take a pattern and a position and even go a little bit more extreme, especially when you rotate to one side. So to say that, their asymmetry makes them special, it does. But at what point does it start to tip the scale and become a negative balance? Because at the end of the day, even though they're rotating one way, they still got to run, walk, breathe, squat. They got to do everything when they're not playing baseball. Right. Rest. I mean, you don't want to rest, rotate it only to one side. So that's the part that always was that always is not complex or to me, but like, let's throw performance out of there. How well are you actually recovering
Right.
as a human? It
And
doesn't even
yeah,
matter if you play a sport.
and recovery is a big buzzword in the industry right now. I mean, the amount of
Yeah,
hashtags for recovery, and
yeah,
some of them I just laugh at. Like, there's no, this has no,
yeah.
just so.
And I'm not talking, Neil, I'm not talking about Normatec boots. That's recovery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so the recovery, how can someone, because then the question becomes, well, if everyone's in this pattern at least a little bit, because we're born right dominant,
Yeah.
why is it that some athletes are perfectly fine and
Mm-hmm.
others cannot stay healthy? Like I constantly think about the guy in the Yankees, Aaron Judge,
Yeah.
constantly getting hurt,
Yeah.
and and oblique strains. I'm
Uh-huh.
fascinated by oblique strains.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and so is there? How would you explain? Is it just luck, or is it some people just remain unaffected by a pattern and actually they use it to their advantage, while other people it becomes the death of them? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many possibilities, because everyone says, well, if we're all in this pattern to at least a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
why does this person have pain and this person, why does my husband have pain and I don't? Or, why do I have pain and my husband does not? Uh, you know, and he looks more asymmetrical than me. Look, he looks like he's a mess. So, but that's always the question.
Yeah.
And there's a million possibilities, but what sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, so there's a million possibilities. I would say the athletes are the best compensators for sure, by and far, because I don't believe even the top, we'll say Usain Bolt, the
Mhm.
fastest man. I bet if we were to check him, I don't know that he would be perfectly neutral,
Right,
in our terms,
right,
right?
right.
Sitting in the middle. I just think he has a higher ability to variability in his system to let go, pick up, let go, pick up, let go, which is transition and oscillate
Mhm.
back and forth. What I think, if I really were to be honest with an athlete about it, I would have to look at their trauma and their history, as far as what did Neil go through as a kid versus what did Aaron Judge go through as a kid.
Right,
Now, I know you're not trying to sign up for the Yankees or anything, but
right.
we'd have to kind of see what was your childhood like. What did you go through that?
I have, this is not well understood, and
So,
I do mention it. So I would like it to come from someone else. I do mention
mhm,
patterns and trauma, and I know, but it seems so abstract and so far-fetched
mhm.
until you've lived in PRI world and you see
Yeah,
these patterns.
yeah,
So can you explain that, what you just said, like how
sure,
someone's history
yeah,
can influence the patterns that they're in?
right. So, Ron has talked about this, but I believe it's around the ages of 7 to 10 that as adults we should still revisit those activities that we did, because those are memories. Those when memories really start to kick in. Our limbic system remembers those activities.
Yeah.
So what if? Oh, sorry. You have a question?
Well, that's just because I don't want to get off topic, but
Okay.
it's always so amazing to me that junior high school and high school are 7, depending on how many grades you have, maybe between 5 and 7 years of your life.
Uh-huh.
Yet they have such an outsized mental memory space. It's so easy
Yeah.
for me to remember every little detail of something that went on in the 8th grade.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember what I was doing 2 years ago.
Or what I ate for breakfast.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what you're talking about. That limbic system and these memories are so strong that people are holding on to these developmental years
Yes.
into their 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
They can't let go.
Yeah.
But so go ahead. So that childhood adolescence is important
Sure.
for a
I
lot
mean,
of
what
them.
if you had there's terrible things in this world. What if you had a tortured childhood
Right?
and your memories are all negative, whether it's abuse, neglect, or um, your family couldn't afford that you couldn't play the sport, or I mean, it could go on forever if we're just talking about athletes. But the other big thing is trauma during development years. So before the age of 2, cranium trauma, big
Oh,
falls, broken bones. I fell in the bathtub when I was 2, have stitches, and I've got some cranium. I don't have cranium issues. I don't want to mean that, but I have a lot of asymmetry in my face and in my bite. And I attribute it to that 2-year-old fall when my jaw took a,
Yeah.
am I completely, maybe I missed that D1 volleyball scholarship because of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm totally
I say
crazy.
I could have been, I could have been a professional athlete if I only had a functioning visual system from a young age. Like
But it's really
what
kind of
I
true.
could have been, because I was a pretty
Yeah.
good athlete with,
Yeah.
and I couldn't even see. But
Right. So you kind of think, what cards were you dealt to either set you up for success or set you up to fight all the hardships? I think another big thing, which I really, really believe in, is multi-sport athletes. So as a young
that's
kid,
huge. Yeah, that's huge. So
yeah, the group that I work pretty closely with, APEC here in Fort Worth, they're an athletic, APEC is Athletic Performance Enhancement, I think is what it stands for. But that's where I work with a lot of these athletes, and they train them. And you start asking some of their histories, and I'm talking about the athletes that are professional now. So we're thinking mid-20s, maybe young 20s. So when they were kids, because I slowly see this gradual change where it's play more of the sport, play more of the sport. Oh, it's not the season, still play the sport. And it's this one sport they get into. It's just like what we were talking about. Your movement variability starts to go down. You're not having to access those different pieces of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
If you're only playing baseball, that's all you're playing. You're doing that
Right.
same motion X amount of days a year.
Yeah.
And at such a crucial age, I mean, your brain's not done until 25 years old.
Yeah.
So you're forming these patterns even stronger
Yeah.
instead of thinking, I need to make sure that I'm doing all sorts of crazy variability in my system. So I think that probably plays a role into it. And genetics are in there. You can't say that there's not genetics involved with this. So if mom and dad are 5'2" and you only become 5 foot, you probably ain't playing in the NBA.
Correct.
So there is a few things. I mean, I think the Mavericks have JJ Barea, and I always feel like, man, how's that guy? He's 5'5", and you look at it, and he's like over like 6 foot. He just looks tiny out there.
Oh, compared to everybody else.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I remember when I got to University of Maryland, and we're not great at football, but it's still an ACC. Well, it used to be ACC, now it's Big Ten.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got to campus and I saw these football players, because I went to a high school that did not produce high school football talent, and we weren't very big.
Yeah.
We were very good at academic things and quiz bowl and tennis and stuff like that. We were not good at the physical sports. However, I remember when I got to Maryland and I'm walking around on campus and I see some of these football players, and I'm just like, holy shit, these guys are gigantic.
Yeah.
But that was one thing, how big and muscular they were, and just not normal. Like if you're an average genetic person, it's going to be very difficult for you to train yourself into an elite athlete. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
These guys and girls are so much more athletic and big and fast than the average person. And if you've never played against them, you don't get it. You don't know what it's like to have someone literally leave you in the dust.
Yeah.
Like you start running, they start running, and the gap just increases. You're like, holy crap, quickness, the ability to accelerate quickly is not something that's trainable for the most part. Maybe you'll shave a little bit off your time, but that's inherent. And but the other thing was the offensive linemen. See, when you look at offensive linemen on TV, they look fat and slow compared to the receivers.
Yeah.
But they are faster than your average person. You just don't know it because your perspective is different. And I remember playing basketball against these big offensive linemen, like just in the gym or in the back of a fraternity house. Yeah. Nice guys, 6'5", 300 pounds. Doesn't look like the guy can move at all on TV, but then you play against them and they are quick.
Yeah. It's kind of like a bear, like a bear running after something. That bear looks slow and you're like, whoa,
and they're so strong, and you just bounce off them. They just put an arm out, they just knock you down. Like professional football players, basketball players, they are a different breed.